Mediabite Podcast Network.
Jason, Mother is talking to you.
I want to play a game.
Don't fall asleep.
Just been informed that zombies have entered the building.
You opened it. We came.
The unburied dead are coming back to life.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Slash It podcast. My name is Jared. Today we are discussing one of the quickest turnarounds for a film we've seen on this podcast. How that affects the film, we can talk about that in a little bit. The film we are discussing today, it has rules, it has kills, it is a woman named Sidney Prescott. Of course, we could be talking about more than one film, but we are talking about the sequel to the original. We are talking about one of the movies with the coolest, craziest openings I've seen in this franchise. We are talking about Scream 2. So Scream 2 released almost exactly 1 year after Scream 1 on December 17th, 1997. And on a budget of $24 million, it made a total of $172.4 million, which is a total profit of $148.4 million. Minus advertising costs and anything else, because usually the way that you normally do it is you divide the budget by half, and then so the total for the film would be like $36 million, and then you subtract 12 from 148. So with all that kind of included, this puts Scream 2 second in total of box office profits underneath the first film, but just kind of minorly. Scream 6 is also right up there. I think it's only $1 million less than the original film. I think it's like 169, I think, something like that. 170, somewhere in there. It's like $1 million less than the original film Scream 6 is. The box office profit for Scream 2 actually is a major plus for the film, considering how horror movies, especially horror movies like slasher sequels like this is, usually do less and less and less at the box office until they kind of slowly piddle out and then nobody really remembers them anymore. Especially at the time where this movie was made. I mean, we're on Bride of Chucky is the next film, and before this, the Chucky franchise was dead. I think Bride of Chucky came out in 1998, I think we checked last time. If you don't know, you can fact check me on what I said last time, and then we'll know. But I think there's something really interesting about that concept. Like, this film did so well that it kind of beat out the kind of expectation for slasher films, how they are. Like, if you can make a film have the same basic profit as the first film, that's really, really, really good. And really, it didn't do any bad at all. Scream 2 did fantastic at the box office, and I think it's because of the fact that the movie's really smart, it's not dumb, and I think it has a really interesting place in the horror genre. Most of the time, a movie that is absolutely a blockbuster, like Scream was, ends up blowing up and usually spawns a bunch of sort of copycat films. And then we get the sequel to the original film that kind of spawned that big boom. Like, we get a copycat of Scream, and then we get Scream 2. Usually is how it goes, right? Well, what is really rather fascinating about this movie is the fact that Scream 2 is not the long-away sequel. In some ways, Scream 2 is the response to the first Scream. It is the copycat of the first movie. And it took advantage of that idea and discusses sequels, the identity that sequels in slasher franchises hold very dear to their hearts, the fact that slasher sequels typically don't respond very well to the previous films. They honestly most of the time kind of ignore whatever happened in the previous film, except for the killer most of the time. Look at Friday the 13th. Look at Halloween. Halloween tries to have a story. It kind of like what happened with Star Wars a little bit, where like every film after it has to like deal with whatever happened in the previous film, explain it, and then tell a story, and then this next film does the same thing rather than planning anything out. Scream 2, you can kind of tell there was a little bit of planning and kind of the way he wanted things to move, especially with a kind of alternate take that I'll tell you here, and then we'll talk about it in Scream 3 a little bit more. The final shot of this film is has Ghostface sitting on top of a clock tower in Windsor College, where this whole film takes place. We haven't even gotten there yet. But that little teaser at the end actually makes Scream 3 make a lot more sense. We'll talk about how that all kind of wraps into each other a little bit and the kind of the theories about what that would have looked like. But it kind of does make the whole Scream 3 thing work really well and a lot better than it would have if that film hadn't happened. Like, if that scene had happened, it would have been a much better film, and it would have worked better. And I just wanted to mention again, this whole film really took advantage of the idea of the fact that Scream was such a big hit. Most films hadn't done that. I think Halloween 2 was 2 years or 3 years after. It was either 80 or 81. I think it was 81 when Halloween 2 came out. So that was 3 years after Halloween, which by that point we'd already had Friday the 13th. We already had those kind of ideas, which I have a lot of discussion about that, but we can talk about that later. Because here's the thing that you have to kind of think about, okay? When you look at something like Halloween to Friday the 13th, right? So Friday the 13th was trying to emulate Halloween. It was trying to be kind of like Halloween, especially the first Friday the 13th. And Friday the 13th was a major success, correct? What is interesting about that is Halloween 2 tried to be Friday the 13th. It tried to emulate Friday the 13th. Halloween 2 emulated Friday the 13th. Every film after Halloween tried to emulate Halloween. But when Friday the 13th hit the market, every film after that tried to emulate what Friday the 13th was. And what makes that idea so fascinating is Halloween then emulated Friday the 13th. And that is what we could have seen with this. We could have seen a film that wasn't Scream, that took the kind of advantageous point that it was, and then turned it into success for that film, which a lot of people tried to do. A lot of like ensemble slashers came out of it. But I think what would have worked better is the way that this happened. Scream 2 works better as the follow-up to Scream because of how close kind of to a horror franchise, quote unquote, the whole film is. And the whole franchise as a whole is all about, horror sequels and horror films and what that means and all that stuff. So I think that this whole film has a fantastic cast and chemistry between all of them. And speaking of cast, let's take a look at who returned and who is new and what will be left of them, which is definitely not a Texas Chainsaw Massacre reference. Do you hate interruptions to your podcast? Yeah, I honestly do too. The only thing I hate more than ad interruptions on my podcasts are ads that you hear on repeat, which, trust me, happens frequently to me. I don't know about you. So you'll hear this once an episode, I promise you. If you want to support my dreams and you're enjoying this episode, you can listen to all the episodes completely ad-free for $5 over on my Patreon. Not just these episodes, but you can listen to all of the episodes for all of the podcasts on the network. You also get access to the commentaries, live streams, Q&As, and all of that other fun stuff that is exclusive to Patreon. So it is patreon.com/MediaBite. Yes, that's right, patreon.com/MediaBite. I will leave you alone and you can zone back into your work or trying to sleep or whatever else it was that you were doing before I so rudely interrupted you. Alright, I'll see ya. So, Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott. In Scream 2, Sidney plays a rather interesting role. She's still grieving everything that Scream 1 brought up. The death of her mother, the lost friends and family that she's now dealing with. But now, in this film, she's gone off to college. She's trying to forget that everything like that happened. At least in a sense, which makes for a rather interesting way of handling the sequel to Scream. Scream 2 is rather focused on the college experience. And Sydney, as she tries to grow away from her past and from Woodsboro and deal with that experience and how that kind of follows her in what is causing the Ghostface murders to follow her, to this school, and to deal with everything that her past has brought for her into her new life. I think the film does a great job at following Sydney as she begins to sort of kind of get through a lot of stuff, dealing with her past traumas, while dealing with the here and now. I think this film, the third film especially, are almost entirely focused on Sydney. Every character, every storyline focuses on Sydney. It's really probably not until Scream 4 where we get anything that's even not about Sydney. And I think it works fine. I think Sydney's character in Scream 2 is strong. It's intentional. She's very well driven. And I think the problem with Scream 2 is not about the fact that she's not doing intelligence. It's not an intelligent character. She's a very intelligent character in this film and even in Scream 3. Even though Scream 3 has different issues that aren't the character's fault. But in Scream 2 specifically, I think the way that they play with her dealing with a lot of the stuff that happened in the Ghostface murders is actually really interesting and very different than what you would expect from a film like this. It actually does talk about how, like, she struggles really deeply with caring about her boyfriend Derek doesn't do anything wrong, but she struggles really badly to trust him because of everything that had happened with Billy Loomis, which makes it for a far more interesting story. You deal with that. You deal with, trusting these friends around you because you don't want any of them to die. And then when some of them start to die, you start to feel like it's all your fault. Like your Sydney is following this cycle where every time she goes somewhere, people die, and these murders follow her. They killed her mother. They killed some of her friends from high school, and now they're killing her friends from college. And she's dealing with, I'm not causing this, but by me being here, I am causing these things to happen to these people. And that is a really hard thing to deal with. I wouldn't know how to deal with that. And I think it's rather cool that she's able to get through that, get through Scream 3, get through Scream 4, get through the 5, the 6, the 7, and kind of deal with those things in a very healthy way. She's very intelligent. Even you see her in Scream 5, she's moved away from Woodsboro. She's gone. She doesn't want anything to do with these murders. She's like, get a gun, I'm hiding, we're not doing this. Especially in Scream 6, she does the same thing. She's like, I'm not dealing with this. And I think that really emphasizes how intelligent she is. She isn't the easy prey in a lot of horror movies like this. Well, I can talk about Sydney and her character for a lot longer than I have time for in a podcast like this, especially because I have a lot of thoughts about a lot of her character, and then the way that they kind of dealt with her character after Scream 5. I haven't seen Scream 7 yet, so I'm basically talking about Scream 6. But I think even in Scream 5, I have problems with her character a little bit. And then I have problems with her character in Scream 6 especially. And then I think Scream 7, I'll have to watch it and come to my own conclusion. But from what I've been reading about it, I don't really like a lot of the things that they're doing. I think they're going away a little bit from the way that Scream is about, what Scream's about, talking about horror movies. It's hard to do it when you become the thing you're parodying. I'm not saying that's what they're doing. I haven't seen the film yet, but that's the sense I get is like you're becoming the parody of the thing that you were talking about. Like you're becoming the parody, which I don't know. We'll see. I'm not saying that for a fact. I have not seen the film yet, but from what I'm reading, it kind of worries me a little bit. Either way, none of that matters right now because we're talking about Scream 2. Talking about Scream 2, we are looking at David Arquette as Dewey Riley. So you already know who David Arquette is if you've listened to the first episode. But if you haven't listened to the first episode, then David Arquette, just really interesting person. He's in a bunch of movies and stuff. But Dewey Riley is limping throughout the entirety of the film. Having dealt with the first attacks of the first film, like in Woodsboro, he limps because he was attacked. He struggles strongly with Gail's new fame from the book that she wrote about the first Ghostface murders, Stab, which is like really, really big and important in this film. Here's kind of an annoying thing that kind of drives me a little crazy with Dewey. In the first 3 films, Dewey is attacked, perceived dead, to be reeled out at the last moment as a feel-good out for the film. And it gets a little bit repetitive even by this part of the franchise. In Scream 2, Gail's book is really tough for Dewey to deal with. Gail wrote Dewey as really inexperienced and like he didn't do enough and things like that. Which like for experience, he didn't do enough, he wasn't aware enough, he didn't do the right things at the right time, which hurt Dewey's feelings. Of course, he's gonna be mad at Gail for thinking of him like that. She was falling in love with him throughout that entire film, and now he's not experienced, he's not a good cop, he doesn't deserve the things that he got, that kind of stuff. But I want to talk about this in a second, because we'll kind of combine these characters, as we're always going to combine these characters probably in these franchise. Not that they're not good separately, but they are very much one unit. The way that Dewey gets stabbed in this movie is heartbreaking, and I think it works better in the Gale Weathers section. So Courtney Cox as Gale Weathers. Gale Weathers wrote the book named Stab that the movie Stabbed is based on, which makes her kind of an outcast from the rest of the group that survived those first murders that she was at, especially after the murders that are happening at the opening of this film, the best opening in any Scream film, in my opinion. Gail shows up after that, trying to almost cash in a way, on the fact that her book was the basis for a movie that had a murder at its premiere, and she was going to write that book. And that's kind of messed up. Kind of makes her feel like she's kind of taking monetary advantage of the kind of murders that she was a part of. Not a part of, but a victim of. So let's talk about the Dewey scene for a second. So they're at the college, and there's a big soundproof room. Gail is on one side, and Dewey's on the other side. Dewey can't hear Gail. She doesn't know why he's like talking to her, yelling at her, but then Ghostface comes out of nowhere and stabs Dewey repeatedly in front of Gail, which I think is part of the reason why we see them so close again in Scream 3, which does not completely surprise me, to be honest with you. It's very flip-flop, 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 their relationship. I think it's a little repetitive at times. I wish they would just have like a good relationship at some point, but very flip-flop, very flip-flop, flip-flop, flip-flop. They're very much in a tumultuous relationship at this point in the film, and it's kind of because, I don't remember, but their actual relationship was very much like how you see it in these films. It's very flip-flop. If they were together, they were together. If they weren't together, they weren't together. It was very one-off, one-on, one-off, one-off. Like, their relationships were very, very rocky, which kind of explains a lot about how they act in this film. There's love, but then there's also the loss of love and how that affects you. And there's a lot of that kind of thing that you kind of have to think about when you're watching these films. Is Gail and Dewey, their actual relationship that Courtney Cox and David Arquette had, is part of the reason why so much of the film feels so real. It's so realistic because they're actually mad at each other, or they're actually upset at each other for different things than what the words that they're saying, but that's why it feels so realistic. So let's look at our next character, which is Sarah Michelle Gellar as Cece Cooper. If you do not know who this person is, you were not alive in the 90s, you don't like 90s pop culture, you don't like anything from the 90s, because Sarah Michelle Gellar was in everything and everywhere. She is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but she's also in I Know What You Did Last Summer, and if you're like me, you would know her from the live-action Scooby-Doo movies and a bunch of other countless things. She plays a rather interesting character and a pretty strong contender for what would in any other film be the last survivor. If we didn't have Sydney, if we didn't have Gail, if we didn't have Dewey, this is the character I would say would be the final contender for the film. It's not what happens in this film, but that's what I would consider her as. She's kind of the last, so she plays the sober sister in the film in this moment before she dies. She's like, basically, she can't get drunk that night in case she needs to drive and pick someone up to give them a ride. So she's a big sorority person, and we only follow her for really a tiny little portion of the film, kind of to give us another kill. But I think she does a fantastic job, and I think if this film was different, she'd be the main character, and I would love to watch a film that starred her as the final girl. Because I Know What You Did Last Summer doesn't either. She's in I Know What You Did Last Summer, but that's not what happens. And I think she would do really well as the main star of a slasher film like this. I don't know how to talk about this one without being angry, and I'm not angry, but makes me mad. So there's a lot to this. There's a lot of reasons why this happened the way it does. So there originally was a different way that Jamie Kennedy as Randy Meeks' character goes. So Randy Meeks is very crucially important to the way that Scream works, right? Having someone there that knows what's going on in the franchise works really, really well. He, in this film, has it's probably the worst decision you could have made, I think, in my opinion. I understand what he was trying to do, what Kevin Williamson was trying to do. I get that. And we'll talk about it as we move forward. But I think this is the pivotal moment, the change between what could have been with Scream and then what wasn't with Scream. I think Scream 2 works really well. I even think parts of Scream 3 works really well. I think even Scream 4 works really well. Scream 4 is really smart. I think Scream 5 works really well. I don't think Scream 6 works all that well. But I think it all stems back to this decision. Everything that doesn't work in those films, I think, stems back to this decision. Randy knows horror movies. These killers are trying to emulate horror films. He knows how to survive. And So they did a great job at returning his character for a good portion of the film. It made us feel like he was going to guide us through the kills and the deaths like he did last time, except the problem is this time that is not what happened. He is killed completely unceremoniously in the back of the killer's van, and honestly is incredibly disappointing. The worst thing they've done as the franchise at this point, in least in my opinion, probably screwing themselves over for a lot of the future installments. Randy is pivotal to what made Scream scream, and the fact that he's kind of just offed completely without much of a deal, especially, like, I understand what Kevin Williamson was trying to do. He was trying to make it say, like, hey, Randy is not off the table. He was trying to say no one's off the table. But we always know that Dewey, Sidney, and Gail are not going to die. Those three people aren't going to die. We know that from the very beginning of going into this film, they're probably not going to die. Killing Randy kills the audience in a way. That was our surrogate into the film. Us, who we are, died, and they lost that connection from us to them. There's not someone like that. Because then every time after this film, you have a Randy replacement. You have VHS tapes in 3. In 4, you have another guy who claims to be Randy. Like, that kind of idea of, I like horror movies. I like remakes of the Scream 5 is exactly the same way. Not Jack Quaid's character, Amber's character, and just Mindy, they all know horror movies. Mindy specifically, it's literally like the nephew or whatever of Randy, or the niece of Randy, I guess. And what struggles, you're just constantly looking for a replacement for Randy when you didn't have to kill off Randy in the first place. And that's something I struggle with a little bit, because I think Randy could have worked a lot better. So originally, this is one of the first films that ever was leaked onto the internet. It's very crucial because it changed a lot of things about this film, things that they couldn't go back and change. Randy's death is one of them. Originally, Randy was not supposed to be a part of the school. He did not go to school there with her. He was not in film classes. I think the film classes thing works really well, but he wasn't in film classes. He was actually hired as the cameraman for Gale Weathers, which is how he's back. That's why he's there. So he replaces the other guy for Gale, and it works really well. And I think it's kind of fascinating that we didn't get that, because that was big part of it. We actually saw Randy for a lot longer, and originally he wasn't supposed to die. He would have been around. And I think, and Kevin Williamson has said that he regretted killing Randy off, which I totally understand. And they actually tried to reverse his death for Scream 3, but because of the way it happens, they couldn't reverse it, and then therefore they couldn't do it, and so they had to kind of do the tapes thing, which didn't work all that well, and it was very strange. So there's a lot of the leaks that were supposed to be different. The killers were different. That's kind of the big thing. That's why it was leaked. Killers were different originally, then they were changed, and then they're not. And I think the original killers would have worked a little bit better. It was supposed to originally be Derek and Haley, but that's not what happened. And you'll see when we talk about the rules, you'll get it. The rules make sense better if it's Derek and Haley, but the rules don't work in this film because of the leak change, kind of, in a way. They sort of work, but not really. So let's look at someone very interesting, very, very interesting. Laurie Metcalf as Debbie Salt. So, she's Debbie Salt. It's really interesting because Debbie Salt is not really her name. But before we get into that, Laurie Metcalf was in JFK, Uncle Buck, and a lot of other things. I've seen her in so many things. But either way, the killer reveal, I guess, here. Debbie Salt is not her real name, and her name, and more people would refer to her as Mrs. Loomis. She is Billy Loomis's mother, and that's why Randy is killed, because Randy called Billy Loomis's name. He called him names and things like that. It was very flippant about Billy Loomis, and did not very, very clearly didn't like Billy Loomis. Then he was killed incredibly violently, which I think is kind of interesting about how you could know it was his mother by the way that she acted about killing Randy. I like her reveal. It is one of those reveals where we kind of follow her character around a lot. It doesn't make sense why she's even here until it all makes sense in the final act of the film. I think the reveal is well done. Her acting is done very well. After the reveal too is very well done. And I think we kind of have to talk about her a little bit when we get to the ending. The ending of this film is insane, and we'll talk about that later Let's move on to Jerry O'Connell as Derek Feldman. Jerry O'Connell was in Stand By Me. You wouldn't even recognize him. Jerry Maguire and Scream 2. He plays Sydney's boyfriend, and their relationship is really interesting because she's very afraid that he is the Ghostface killer, especially after Billy and kind of like how that whole relationship worked out with Billy, and oftentimes pushes Derek away, which the past kind of comes back to bite her because her pushing him away is actually what kind of made him die in the first place. Their relationship together is really cute, and I wish we could have seen it progress it like further. But however, pushing Derek away makes sense if he's the killer like he was supposed to in the original script, which, by the way, we'll talk about it more when we get into Scream 3, but Scream 3 takes place in Hollywood if you didn't know, and part of the big kind of plot is that they're getting all the pages the moment that it comes the day of. Like, they don't know what's going to happen until the day of shooting, and the reason that they don't know in Scream 3, the actors don't know in Scream 3, like in-universe actors, is because of what happened in Scream 2, and they had to rewrite the whole film as they were going on, which I think is kind of interesting. But Derek would have been the killer, and I think that is partially what would have changed very differently about the films. So let's move on to kind of another kind of major player, Timothy Olyphant as Mickey. The man is in everything. He's most notable probably in Deadwood, Justified, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and The Mandalorian. Those are the things that I know him from, I've seen him in, but that's a lot of people know him from a lot of different plays because he's a very, very strong actor. He works a lot. He plays a killer in this film and does a great job as the killer. And honestly, I don't think I would have guessed him as the killer if it wasn't already, like, if I already hadn't known that he was the killer, because unfortunately I kind of knew. He plays kind of the role that a lot of people play, where they're sort of like the Stu maniac crazy killer, like replacement. I think Mickey is the best that ever did it because of the way that he handles a lot of his own murders. It's more purposefully violent, which leads to my belief of how crazy and insane he is, like, through the whole film. He very specifically is more violent, and he talks about that, which is what sells that idea. It sells the idea that he is being purposely more violent and more crazy and more insane, and everything else was just a face because he is supposed to be crazy and violent and angry more than Mrs. Loomis. That's how Mrs. Loomis was able to do all the kills, is because Mickey was crazy. There's a lot, but we'll talk more about the killers when we get to the endings, and so we'll move on. Liev Schreiber as Cotton Weary. Cotton Weary is the guy on the TV we see in the first Scream, the guy that Sidney had kind of locked up wrongfully. And in this film, he has been exonerated for his crimes because Billy Loomis and Stu Macher both admitted to it. He and Sidney are supposed to have an interview together, which is kind of interesting because it was supposed to clear his name publicly. He had nothing to do with the killings in Woodsboro or Sidney's mother, and he was supposed to tell publicly that I didn't do it, right? And Sidney kind of doesn't go on this interview with him. Sidney is supposed to go on this interview with him and clear his name, and Cotton's name is cleared, and forgive Sidney for wrongfully putting him in jail. And I think that whole idea is really interesting, but they kind of, Sidney kind of ignores Cotton and kind of doesn't talk about it, and I think Cotton has a rightful place to be a little bit angry. But Cotton doesn't also, because Cotton is mostly doing it for fame. He's trying to be the guy that was wrongfully accused of the Woodsboro murders. And so I see both sides of that, like why she left. I also see him wanting her to tell everyone else that he didn't do anything wrong. So with all these characters into place, let's take a look at the first time that I ever actually saw any of these characters. So I honestly can't remember the first time I saw Scream 2. It was really early on in my love of horror. It was probably one of the first movies I ever watched by myself, besides like Halloween or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I loved Scream 2, but I especially loved the opening to this film, which has one of the best openings for this entire franchise by a long, 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 long shot. It's one of the best film openings maybe ever. And it honestly stuck to me in such a fascinating way. So it wasn't that interesting, but it is important. However, I have also seen this film on an airplane, which was like the first time I had flown, not as like a baby. I was like a child. And then when I was 18, we went to California that's a whole nother conversation. But I watched it on the airplane, and that meant a lot to me. So I'll never forget watching Scream 2 on the airplane going to California for the first time, and maybe, probably, hopefully not for the last time, because I want to live there. But that's not important to this film. Well, it kind of is because this whole film takes place in California. So, if you're interested, let's hear the plot of Scream 2. Let's hear the plot of Scream 2. So, here's kind of a not exhaustive version of the film's plot. And we'll be talking not as much about the very, very end, because that's kind of important. So, two Windsor College seniors, Maureen Evans and Phil Stevens, attend a sneak preview of Stab, a film based on the events of the Woodsboro Massacre, which this is the book that Gail Withers was writing. So, there is people with fake Ghostface costumes, knives, prop knives, screaming, all hyped up to see this movie. They're really excited to see Stab, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But Phil Stevens is briefly exit the theater to use the bathroom, and he's killed by someone wearing a Ghostface costume. It's like through the wall of the bathroom. Then this person wearing the Ghostface costume sits down next to Maureen, sitting in Phil's place. The killer then stabs her repeatedly, unnoticed by the big crowd. Then she climbs up on stage in a cry for help, which the audience mistakes for a big publicity stunt, until she falls dead on the ground. So the news media, local journalist Debbie Salt descends on Windsor College, where Sidney Prescott is a student alongside her roommate Haley McDaniel, her new boyfriend Derek Feldman, fellow Woodsboro survivor Randy Meeks, and Derek's friend Mickey Alaretti. So then that night, Sidney and Haley attend a party at the sorority house Delta Lambda Zeta, and then we get to the end of the film. So that's kind of like the way that this whole film starts. There's also a bunch of scenes. The most infamous scene, in my opinion, is the scene in the cafeteria. I'm just going to sing it, and if you've ever seen Scream 2, you'll know. And then I'll have this on the internet forever, and then I will be embarrassed when I'm 30. I think I love you, and I'm not gonna say for... I don't know how the lyrics go, but you know what I'm saying. I think I love you. I don't remember. I don't even know the song. I literally just know that song from Scream 2. I just know, I think I love you, and then I can't remember any of the lyrics for that song, but I'm embarrassed now. But I'd be really embarrassed even if I had to act out that scene, and everyone knew I had to act out that scene. I'd be embarrassed. That scene's very woo to me, but there's a lot of scenes like that. There's a lot of like small moments, but that's kind of the generic plot for the film. So here are the rules. The rules are a little bit different in this film. They are told by Randy still, and then kind of directly to Dewey. So Randy and Dewey are having this conversation. So here are the rules to successfully survive a horror movie sequel. So the body count is always bigger. There's always going to be more deaths, which there is. There's always going to be more kills. The death scenes are always much more elaborate, more blood, more gore, more stuff like that. So then Randy starts to kind of begin this third rule. If you want your films to become a successful franchise, never, ever. But then he gets interrupted by Dewey. So the film's original teaser, which is kind of really important to this, actually originally revealed what the third rule was. Never, ever, under any circumstance, assume the killer is dead. That was supposed to be what the third rule was. That was supposed to be what, kind of referencing the first Scream, where Randy's last line is that the killer always comes back to life for one scare. I think it would have worked a little bit better, in my opinion. I like the third rule a lot because it makes a lot of sense when you tie it back to Billy Loomis's mother kind of being a part of this. So in a sense, he does come back to kill. The rules work. They kind of are accurate, kind of not super accurate. They work, they don't work, sort of yes and no. I think the rules are really important to this film and to just every kind of film in this franchise, really. I think so, like the body count's always bigger. Yeah, that makes sense. More elaborate, more blood, more gore. That explains Mickey and his craziness, which again is why this film, the craziness in this film works, because Mickey is crazy, and Mickey's violence and Mickey's like wanting to be a serial killer, a famous serial killer, works really well, is because Mickey is crazy. Mickey is insane, and it works because of that. Speaking of Mickey, let's talk about some things here. So Mickey is the one who killed all of the people in the theater. So Phil and Maureen. So Phil is stabbed. So by the way, we're on to the kills from the film. So Phil is stabbed through a bathroom stall with a hunting knife, which is the first kill of the film you see. So then Maureen Evans, which is played by Jada Pinkett Smith, by this point just Jada Pinkett, was bled out after being stabbed once in the stomach and 6 times in the back by Mickey with a hunting knife in the theater still. Which again, it all works out really well. Like, it doesn't seem like it would work out very well, but it actually really does. There's a lot of interesting things that go on here. And the way this whole film is shot, if you have time, I don't know if you're at work, if you're at your house, cleaning, whatever you're doing right now, go to your TV, go to your online, like if you can, if your workplace won't be mad at you. Look up the opening scene to this film. Really get into the mood of how this film is set up, because that explains a lot about the way the rest of the film looks and feels. This is a very ceremonious death. And I think that's why Randy's death hurts so much, because he's like the 4th kill, I think. Yeah, the 4th kill in the whole franchise in this whole film is Randy. And random people that we've met don't have have very ceremonious deaths, but Randy doesn't. And I think that kind of explains that. But just look up the opening, and then, go back to cleaning or whatever you're doing right now. Casey, or CC Cooper, was thrown off the 2nd floor balcony after being stabbed twice in the back by Mickey. She literally is chucked off the balcony, and it's kind of like sad. It's really, actually a really sad scene because I liked her character a lot. So then Randy Meeks has his throat slit after being stabbed 4 times in the chest by Nancy Loomis with a hunting knife off camera. So then there's somebody named Officer Andrews who is killed by Mickey. Officer Richard is impaled in the back of the head with a pipe while on a moving car. Haley McDaniel is stabbed 4 times in the chest by Mickey. Derek Feldman is shot in the chest by Mickey with a pistol. Nancy Loomis, Debbie Salt, or Ghostface, is shot in the head by Sidney Prescott with a pistol after being shot in the neck by Cotton Weary with a pistol to make sure she was dead. So they both kind of take that kill. So then Mickey is shot 16 times in the chest by Sidney Prescott, and Gail Weathers with pistols after being shot 3 times in the shoulder by Nancy Loomis with a pistol. Shared kill. Keeps getting shot multiple times and surviving. So let's look at the reveal, or the ending. As night falls over the campus, Dewey and Gail go to a building to review tapes of footage shot by Joel, hoping to spot the killer in the vicinity of the previous crime scenes. But Ghostface attacks them, stabbing Dewey. So that's kind of what I was talking about. They're in the soundproof room. That's why they're separated like that. 2 officers drive Sidney and Haley to a safe house, are murdered when Ghostface intercepts the vehicle, which, by the way, this is the most, intense moment in the film. Is Sidney has to crawl over the body of a Ghostface, and it is so intense, and you're like, oh my god, Ghostface is literally about to stab Sidney, because she's crawling over top of his body to escape the car wreck. It's very intense. So after that happens, Ghostface is knocked unconscious, but that's when Haley dies. So drawn to music playing in the campus theater, Sidney finds Derek in the auditorium tied to a cross from an earlier fraternity hazing ritual. So then Ghostface arrives, revealing himself as Mickey, and then he shoots Derek on the cross, killing him. Mickey then tells Sidney that he's going to kill Sidney and allow his arrest in an effort to blame movie violence for the murders and become famous from the trial. When the police arrive, Dewey is revealed to be alive. Gail climbs into the ambulance with him rather than taking the opportunity to report with the returning Joel. So that's when Debbie arrives, holding Gail at gunpoint, and then that's when she's revealed to be Mickey's accomplice. That's when actually Sidney finally recognizes her as Nancy Loomis, the mother of Woodsboro killer Billy. The mother of Billy Loomis. So that's when Nancy then kills Mickey, saying that she only used Mickey to frame him for the whole killing spree. So Mickey shoots, almost kills Gail. Gail falls off the stage. That's when Nancy kind of reveals her motive, that she is planning to kill Sidney because of killing Billy, and that she murdered Randy in Joel's news van for slandering her son's name. That's when Sidney points out that Nancy's motive doesn't really work out very well, considering that her abandoning Billy is actually what caused Billy to go crazy in the first place. So they fight. Cotton shows up and holds them both at gunpoint. Nancy tries to manipulate Cotton into thinking that Sidney, and killing Sidney, that her testimony is what got him arrested in the first place. He instead chooses to shoot Nancy in exchange for an interview with Sydney and Diane Sawyer. So Sydney, Cotton, Gail all recover, look over Nancy's body, which Mickey suddenly resurfaces, but is shot to death in the head by Gail and Sydney. So then Sydney then shoots Nancy in the head to make sure she's actually dead in the first place. So then Sydney instructs the press to direct questions to Cotton to remove attention from herself and to reward Cotton for helping her deal with, everything that had just happened at this point. So that's kind of the ending of the film. Let's look at the overall rating. I would probably rate this. It's not a 7 like the first Scream is, because they have a few issues with it. I think the actual original script for this film would have been really close to a 7. This probably is a 6. I think the opening scene for this film actually is what bumps it up. That probably from like a 5.5, but 6 because of the fact that this opening scene is as incredible as it is. Just for the opening scene alone is why I give this movie a 6.5 out of 7. So we've always done 7. 1 to 3 is like bad on the bad side. 4, 5, 6 are like good, but bad, good, bad, mid, good, mid, and then 6 and 7. Good. So yeah, so that's probably my rating. Probably 6 is probably my official rating for Scream 2. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have questions, if you have things that you want to critique me on about how to do this podcast, you want more in-depth thing into this podcast, please let me know, because I can go more in-depth, and I'm totally willing to go more in-depth, more intense with certain aspects, talk more about the kills, more about the behind-the-scenes stuff, all that stuff. If you want a behind-the-scenes section for these podcasts, please let me know. I'm willing to do that. I love behind-the-scenes stuff. I love all that kind of fun jazz. So if that is something that interests you, please let me know. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening, please rate and review this podcast. I would deeply, deeply appreciate it. Whatever you'd like to. I prefer 5 stars, but I can't stop you. And I would really appreciate it because it means a lot to me that you're listening to this. Again, we're going to try to do this weekly. That's the goal. Weekly. Whatever I can do. If I got to, make up an episode, because I'm failed writing one of the kind of main episodes, if you want me to talk about a movie, whatever. That's my big thing. And yeah, so thank you all. It's I'm Media by Company on Instagram, and then we are also on Threads. We're also on Bluesky, mediabyte.bsky.social, and we're also on a bunch of other of the fun websites like that. We have Patreon, patreon.com/mediabyte. You get ad-free podcasts on all your podcasts, stuff like that. Yeah, so I really appreciate you guys listening. Honestly, it means the world. Listen to all the podcasts on the Media Byte Podcast Network. There's Diary of an Indie Filmmaker and Exploring Cinema are the other two. We have another one we might be doing soon. Just listen to all of them. It would mean a lot to me. So we're only going to get better with time as we do this more and more frequently. So be prepared for a lot more episodes like this into the future. So yeah, so thank you all, and I will see you in the next one. As I've always said on every podcast, every slasher thing ever, treat every day like it's Halloween. For more podcasts like this, please make sure to listen to all the podcasts on the Media Byte Podcast Network.